Biographical Bytes from Bala number 55, Take Me to the River, a visit to Laurel Hill West's river section.
That are covered with thorn. Who are these names I keep? Who are these names I keep? Who are these names I keep? Who are these names I keep?
I am Joe Lex, creator and longtime host of All Bones Considered in Biographical Bytes from Bala. As I dictate this on May 14th, we are about to surpass 100,000 downloads. You can email me to congratulate me, jrlexjr1947@gmail.com. I had very much intended for this episode to be about longtime media critic, founding dean of the Annenberg Center, a Hungarian patriot, just an amazing story, George Gerbner. And I do still want to tell his story, but the fact is now I've got 3 or 4 other Hungarians I can talk about. So I'm going to put them in a Hungarian podcast toward the end of the year. Gerbner intrigued me because he was at the University of Illinois just before I was there, way back in the early 1970s. When I got out of the Army in 1970, January of 1970, I actually got an early out so I could go to the University of Illinois. It didn't take. I dropped out 2 more times. But Gerbner had just left. He had been chair of communications, and one of my friends, Quentin Schultz, whom I first met in 1972. He went on to be professor of communications at a college up in Minnesota. And he was good friends with radio personality Gene Shepard. Quinn's most recent book, in fact, is called You'll Shoot Your Eye Out, Life Lessons from the Movie, A Christmas Story. So I will get to Gerbner, I promise. I'm still catching up. In the last couple of months, I've been doing author events, and I had to develop 2 new tours plus a virtual tour. Now, I shared one of those tours with you last month when I gave you a virtual tour of the columbarium. And I only left it up for about a week. And I may change my mind on that, but I'm going to keep it off at least for another month or so. This month is going to be something similar, but I'm going to leave this tour up. I spent several dozen hours developing a tour called Take Me to the River, about that named section at Laurel Hill West. 3 people showed up, and that's because the last stop on that tour was Anna Jarvis, the mother of Mother's Day, and a woman had asked her son and daughter, they said, what do you want to do on Mother's Day? She said, I want to do a cemetery tour. And they looked, and lo and behold, there was a tour the day before Mother's Day that ended with the mother of Mother's Day, Anna Jarvis. So I spent dozens of hours researching this, and those 3 people heard a lot of it. Now I got to share it with the rest of you. I refuse to let all that good information go to waste. I'm almost 79 years old. I've rounded third. I am heading home. And I keep in mind the old Chinese adage, every time an old person dies, a library burns down. I take that very seriously. I've gathered all this information, and I desperately want to share it with people. Now, as a reminder, this is Laurel Hill West. We are talking about different city, different township, different county than Laurel Hill East, even though they are separated by only 2 miles of physical earth. Laurel Hill East also has a river section. It's the only section that is duplicated in both cemeteries. There's a river section at both. I could easily give a Take Me to the River tour of the astonishing people buried at Laurel Hill East in the river section. Arctic explorer Elijah Kent Kane. Charles Thompson, the guy who designed the Great Seal of the United States. Frank Furness is buried there. Harry Callis. Remember Hold Your Horses, Horace? The pilot, Leonard Hubbard, the bass player for the Roots. All of these people are buried at the river section of Laurel Hill East. Maybe we'll get to that one day. Right now, we're going to visit the river section at Laurel Hill West. It is one of the oldest at this cemetery. In 1869 and 1870, John J. Smith and the other founders of what was then called West Laurel Hill Cemetery purchased two farms, 88 and 17 acres. They were on bluffs more than 225 feet above the Schuylkill River. The first four areas of the cemetery, most of these areas in the cemetery are named for local townships, Marion, Bryn Mawr, Franconia, but they started in 1871 with just four sections: Washington, Montgomery, Marion, and River. The Pencoid section followed closely in 1874. Now, this original purchase of land did not extend to Belmont Avenue. So in 1871, they purchased a 2-acre, 100-foot wide strip of land that provided access to the major road. It took until 1892 until the cemetery itself actually reached its edge at Belmont. It was founded in 1869. What happened in 1876? The big centennial. The township banned funerals on Belmont. So you couldn't bring even though we did have access to that road, you couldn't bring your beloved into the property from that road for that year of the centennial. People came by boat upriver or by train upriver. But finally, in 1892, the cemetery itself reached Belmont. The early tombstones of the river are carved from marble. Many of them have melted through the seasons of acid rain, blistering heat, frigid cold. By the 1890s, northern granite in a variety of colors had started to replace the marble. Sculptors love marble. If you look at the Mohs scale, M-O-H-S, that's a hardness scale. It goes from 1 to 10, like 1 is talc and 10 is carborundum. And I'm doing this from memory, so I may have the numbers wrong. But marble is low on the Mohs scale. Marble is only a 3. Granite's, I think, 6, maybe 7. So sculptors love marble because they could use hand tools. Granite, you need power tools, and the steam power tools were not available until the late 1800s. So that's why you could see some really fancy granite starting in the 1890s. In this river section, in all four of these early sections, there's just a handful of mausoleums. And the river section is the only place where there is a brownstone mausoleum on the property. It's built into the hillside on the lower edge of the river section. The river tour that I put together starts at the Conservatory in the bell tower. So, you're in the parking lot. There is that monstrous Bergdahl mausoleum over there on the corner. Head that direction and take a right turn. You're going to follow the paved path for about a 7 or 8 minute walk. You're going to pass a marvelous selection of marble and granite monuments, all shapes and sizes. And if you're a regular listener, you're going to meet some friends from prior podcasts. You're going to stroll past Ratcatcher Lou. I talked about him in All Bones Considered 76. Elwood Rutschman, All Bones Considered 50. He was the first professional basketball coach. The Calder family is to the right with that Celtic cross. I talked about them in All Bones Considered number 18. Under a tree is a small stone on the left for Donald Fithian Lippincott, who for one day was the fastest man in the world when he beat the world record at an Olympic trial, but then lost the next day to somebody who went a tenth of a second faster. It's back in the days when they couldn't do hundredths of a second. They could only do tenths of a second. And then under that magnificent Japanese weeping scholar tree up on the tree, or up on the bluff on a small hill, let's call it a hill on the left, is the final resting place of Annie Inglis, the young girl who died when she was 19, and eventually Inglis House was named for her. I talked about her at All Bones Considered 32. That's about where you're making the turn, and now you're in the Pencoid section on the right, and you'll see a bunch of stones down the hill. The receiving vault is down there. And as you walk up that path, you're coming up a little bit of a hill now, you're going to see some shrubs off to the right. That is where we're going to start. Before you get there, Pencoid section, just before the shrub, is Victor Andreoli, Babe Andreoli, one of our gangsters and thugs who was an Eastern State Penitentiary escapee who was killed in a shootout with the cops. I talked about him in All Bones Considered 79. So now we are hitting the river section. If you look at an upside-down map of Laurel Hill West, this section assumes the general shape of a lower leg and an ankle going into a Dutch wooden shoe. I don't know how else to describe it, but if you look at the section on a map upside down, it's contiguous with the Pencoid section, and there's only that little bit of shrubbery to mark the dividing line. You ready? Right side, gray stone about 4 feet tall, the name BODE, B-O-D-E. That is where we start. Frederick Bode is the first name on that stone. His dates are 1857 to 1942. This is River 128, by the way. This is plot 128, but it's on the edge of the section. Frederick was a jeweler. He and Evelyn were married for 64 years. Not on the front, but on the back is the name Charles Frederick Ellis. He was the son of Bessie Bode Ellis. His father is buried elsewhere. Did I put his dates? Yeah, 1922 to 2004. He went to the University of the Arts. He was PAFA. He was a commercial artist for the Saturday Evening Post, for Jack and Jill. Did a lot of stuff for the Sunday Inquirer. And in 1971, he was hired to teach illustration at the Art Institute of Philadelphia. There he taught and befriended Jamie Wyeth. He lived in Narberth. He ran with the Narberth ambulance for 20 years. As a retired emergency physician, I appreciate that. I truly do. Although back in the day, when they weren't that good, we used to call Narberth ambulance near-death ambulance. That's an insider joke, and believe me, they are no longer near-death. They are a superb paramedic group. Charles Ellis has his own website. Just look up Charles F. Ellis, artist, and you will see dozens of examples of his artwork. It reminds me of he's kind of a throwback to the magazine illustrators of the 20s and 30s, the Leyendecker and Wireman and people like that. That's what his works remind me of. Now, the next big plot, you're going to see a lot of stones together, River 124. You'll see a stone in the back that looks like it has a broom on it. The broom is actually an upside-down torch. Meaning life extinguished. You'll notice that the torch is also surrounded by ivy. Anyway, that's the plot that we're going to. This is the Taylor-Clark plot. I'm going to start with Emily Winslow Taylor, 1822 to 1904. She was an abolitionist. When she was 18 years old, she attended the 1840 World Anti-Slavery Convention in London, where she met Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, William Lloyd Garrison. The women were not allowed to be seated at the discussions of this convention. So all of these people get together to talk about abolition, and they won't take the opinions of the women initially. That changed eventually. But Emily Winslow Taylor grew up and married and gave birth to a gentleman named Frederick Winslow Taylor, 1856-1915. He went to Germantown, he went to Phillips Exeter, and he was a sports guy. He loved baseball, tennis, golf. In 1881, he actually partnered with his brother-in-law, Clarence Clark, who I'll talk about next, and they won the first U.S. Open doubles championship. As a golfer, he had a bizarre stance, although he only had an 8 handicap, and he finished 4th. He just barely missed medaling in golf in the 1900 Paris Olympics, the so-called zany games. He also spent years developing putting grass. And if my memory serves me right, the putting grass that he developed is what they use on a few of the greens at Pine Valley. But what Frederick Winslow Taylor is best known for, he is the father of scientific management, efficiency. One best way This is a person who actually has a movement named for him, Taylorism. If you look up Taylorism, it's talking about this guy. One of the things he discovered is the most effective load for people to lift with a shovel is 21.5 pounds. If you're in a steel mill, there's a big difference between 21.5 pounds of sawdust and 21.5 pounds of pig iron. He had shovels specifically made that would pick up the right amount each time. Profits soared. Everybody made more money. Of course, the owners made a lot more money than the workers. The workers did see an increase in their salary, but the capitalists were the ones who made all of the money on this. And a lot of people, especially the union groups hated Frederick Winslow Taylor because he made them work harder. He knew how much they could do, and he insisted they do that much work. Peter Drucker, business historian Peter Drucker, puts Frederick Winslow Taylor with Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud, but above Charles Darwin as most significant person of the 19th century. When the Harvard Business School opened, it based its curriculum on the theories of Frederick Winslow Taylor. I covered him in All Bones Considered 34, Tennis, and he won. I talked about his sports more than I talked about the efficiency stuff. His brother-in-law is buried right next to him, Clarence Monroe Clark, 1859 to 1937. The Clarks have been in this country since 1630. With the Drexel family, the Clark family were the primary bankrollers of the Mexican War. Now, the Clarks and the Taylors had estates next to each other in Germantown. They set up a home tennis court sort of between the two properties. These guys became very good tennis players together, as I said. Clark graduated from Penn in 1878. In 1881, he was co-founder of the United States National Lawn Tennis Association. And in 1884, he married Fred Taylor's sister. That's why they're buried in the same plot. 1883, he and his brother were the first Americans to play center court at Wimbledon. And in 1983, 100 years later, he was elected to the International Tennis Hall of Fame. And don't forget, he and his brother-in-law, Frederick Winslow Taylor, won the first U.S. Open in 1881. Okay, moving on. There's a small stone up towards the front. It says Albert Elmer Hancock. This is River 119. Mr. Hancock was a professor of literature at Harvard. He lived from 1870 to 1915. Many, many scholarly works available. If you go online and look up Albert Elmer or A.E. Hancock, you can see a lot of his work. A typical lecture that he'd give would be like Turgenev and the Russian Realists. Christmas Eve, 1915, he left a note that he was going to Kittatinny Park to commit suicide. He concluded the note by saying, "The mania broke out in a more malignant form. I have no fear of death." He was found prostrate in the snow with a temple bullet hole. His wife outlived him by 40 years. Now walk a few feet up and marvel at the fact that there is a large empty plot of land. I am intrigued by empty plots of land. I went through this a few years ago. There was a segment of land at Laurel Hill East that drove me crazy in the K section, right across from K Point. The best views, some of the best views in the cemetery. Goodness, you can stand on that little mound there and you can see all the way downstream to Center City. It's just a beautiful plot. There were no markers on it. So I investigated and found out that was where the Craig family was buried. And now they have a marker because I got people involved who were involved with the Craig family. So they now have a marker. I want to do the same thing with this next one. This is Henry G. Freeman, Jr., 1840-1917. He purchased 6 plots of land. This is a 42 by 42 foot plot, more than 1,600 square feet sitting there with nothing on it. In 1913, Henry G. Freeman Jr. wrote his will. You're going to love this. He left a $12,000 annual stipend to the First Lady of the United States as, quote, pin money, end quote. He died 2 years later. His last survivor died in 1989. And the Henry G. Freeman Jr. Pin Money Fund became active. The first check went to Hillary Clinton. Now, this is 1989, so this was the Bush-Clinton exchange, the Bush-Clinton changeover. Barbara Bush received a retroactive check for $36,000 from this will that had been written in 1913. She donated it to charity. The whole thing became known when the Clintons released their tax reports every year, as they do, and somebody noted that she made a donation of $12,000 that was given to her from something called the Henry G. Freeman Jr. Pin Money Fund. The reason it's called pin money, by the way, pins were so valuable hundreds of years before this. Women used pins to hold their clothes together. They used them to hold their menstrual clothing on. They used them for self-defense. Pins were so valuable that they were actually left in wills to the next generation. That's where the term pin money comes from. In 2010, Michelle Obama was given a check for $12,000. And she checked into it, and according to the laws of the state of Illinois, which she claims as her permanent residence, she could not accept this. I didn't understand the details of it totally. But Michelle Obama essentially sent the check back and told them to dissolve the fund and distribute to other people. That's exactly what they did. So for a very short period of time, from 1989 until 2010, the First Lady of the United States received a $12,000 a year gift from Henry G. Freeman Jr., who died in 1917 after purchasing more than 1,600 square feet of burial property at Laurel Hill West, which is still not used by anyone. And then he ends up being buried over at Woodlands. So I don't know the story behind that. There's got to be a story. But I love the pin money story. And you've got to share that with people. You've got to tell people that there was this guy who literally sent a check to the First Lady of the United States from beyond the grave. That's funny. Anyway, the next one is not so funny. Right next to it, after you finish that large blank area, there's a stone for Walter Washington, 1832 to 1870. He was a merchant. And for reasons we will never know, on February 17th, 1870, less than a year after this cemetery opened, he went to Fairmount Waterworks Hill. We would now call that the the Philadelphia Museum of Art, but that's where the waterworks was back in the 1870s. And he shot himself in the abdomen. He shot himself to death in the abdomen. Suicide was an incredibly common form of death in the 19th century. It's staggering how many of these people ended up killing themselves, ending their own lives. Next to Walter Washington is Thomas Wallace Evans. The Evans plot is River 109 and 111. There are 14 people buried there, and I have not investigated them yet, but one of them dates back to 1789. Eliza Bayard Yard is 1789. Next, we come to a monument. There is no doubt the man's face is right there. John Weiss, or maybe Ween. I still haven't figured out what his middle name is. Forney. River 101. Mr. Forney, 1808 to 1870. I talked about him, Biographical Bytes from Bala number 41. He's born in Lancaster. He's friends with James Buchanan. He bought a newspaper in 1837. In 1845, President Polk appointed him as Philadelphia Port Surveyor. So he was able to take a little bit from every ship that was coming in, and he became a wealthy man. From 1851 to 1855, he served as House of Representatives clerk as a Democrat. In 1856, he ran Buchanan's campaign for the presidency. And in 1857, he put himself up as selection for the Senate. This is at a time, this is before citizens elected the Senate. This is when Congress people selected the senator, and he was not chosen. So he threw his weight behind Stephen Douglas. From 1861 to 68, he became Lincoln's man, and he was Secretary of the U.S. Senate. So this is the only person who has ever served as Clerk of the House and Secretary of the Senate. He kept a bottle of booze at his desk, which provided support, and people were constantly stopping by his desk just to say hi and have a little nip. If you know the story about Andrew Johnson showing up the morning of his inauguration, drunk, completely mortifying Abraham Lincoln, it's because he had been drinking with Forney, and he'd stopped at Forney's desk for a belt or two before he went in to take his oath of office. He also got drunk with Hayes and Herndon at Gettysburg when Lincoln went to give the Gettysburg Address there. Hayes and Herndon were singing war songs with Forney, getting drunk at a hotel room. Like I said, I talked about him in Biographical Bytes from Bala number 41. His son, Philip Reitzel Forney, captain in the military, 1840 to 1870. On July 7th of 1870, he was in New Orleans, and he slipped while he was jumping onto a train. His leg was crushed. He did not get amputation, and he died of tetanus a few days later. Now, there's a small stone it's in front of the big monument. It's to the right. It's for Matilda Forney, Tilly May Forney, 1862 to 1922. In 1890, she was a newspaper reporter. She was one of about 600 women reporters in the United States. She grew up in a house on Washington Square, which she never left. Interesting little tidbit. Rich Victorian women only married about half the time. Half of them who had their own money didn't bother to get married. They just went on to live their lives with the money that they had. So she was wealthy. She stayed single her whole life. She stayed in the same house her entire life. What she wrote for newspapers was chatty columns for upper crust magazines, things about flower arrangements and table settings. There was one column I read about the poor society woman who in season should have 4 changes of clothing daily, depending upon what the activities are. In 1905, Tilly May found 2 of her servants dead in the kitchen of a murder-suicide. 1921, she had a nervous breakdown. She was confined to bed and died, like I say, in 1922. Again, I talked about her in All Bones Considered 84 when I talked about 4 more women pioneers. She was my woman reporter. And finally, also at this Forney plot, look to the right and in the rear. And that's where his daughter is buried. It says, wife of Henry Gordon Thunder, and you're going to see musical staffs on that. This is one of my favorite discoveries at the cemetery. Henry Gordon Thunder was born in Tipperary. He married the Forney daughter who was not Roman Catholic. So he was expelled after his divorce, expelled from the church. But he stayed on as organist. And Henry Gordon Thunder developed the best orchestra in the city that was so good that when Frances Ann Wister, buried at Laurel Hill East, I talked about her, and Leopold Stokowski were putting together the initial Philadelphia Orchestra in 1900, they essentially poached all of Henry Thunder's musicians. So he just threw, if you can't beat him, join him. So he became a partner with Stokowski. In March of 1916 was the first United States performance of Mahler's Symphony No. 8 in E-flat minor, the so-called Symphony of 1,000, because they use an augmented orchestra of 110 people. There is a double chorus of 400 adult voices each, augmented by a children's choir. They built 24 high bleachers on the stage of the Academy of Music to fit all of these people. And even then, they couldn't fit everybody in. They put the horns. If you've been to the Academy, you know that there are boxes beside the stage. They put the trumpet players in the upper boxes beside the stage. There wasn't room for them on the stage. Also, because they sound great from up there. So Henry Gordon Thunder, finally, 1930, he got an honorary music degree from the University of Pennsylvania. I think that Henry Gordon Thunder deserves a plaque on the wall of Walk of Fame. The Music Walk of Fame on Broad Street there, the Avenue of the Arts. I talked about him in a podcast on the Philadelphia Orchestra, Biographical Bytes from Bala, number 28. Okay, that spooky thing just a few feet ahead with the frost. It looks like frosted glass. It's not. It's just old glass that is filthy. It's deteriorating. Jean-Auguste Girard, 1808 to 1870. He is the nephew of Stephen Girard. He was born in France. You probably know the story that Stephen Girard died the richest man in the United States. He was not a religious man. He had little love for his family. And he left $6 million for public purposes. Girard College, Girard section of Philadelphia. His will was written by William Duane, Benjamin Franklin's grandson. He buried over at Laurel Hill East, the guy who helped get Thomas Jefferson elected president. This will was 35 pages long, 26 sections. It was unbreakable. The family was furious that they were cut out of this will, and they sued in 1844. And the Supreme Court, Vidal et al. Versus Mayor, Aldermen, and Citizens of Philadelphia, the Supreme Court said, nope, that will is valid. So the family was cut off, and the city is still enjoying the residue. Philadelphia would not be nearly what it is today without Benjamin Franklin and Stephen Girard, both of whom loved this city so much they left their wealth to it to let it develop. So we have those two gentlemen to thank. And Jean-Auguste Girard is with us, and he didn't get a penny of that money. And according to the information I have, there used to be a light in there. I have no idea where the electrical supply came from, if there was a light in there, and I don't see any sign of a light in there right now. Okay, move up a little bit and see that Gilbert, Joseph Gilbert, Henry Lee Gilbert. Joseph was a captain in the Civil War, 1842 to 1911. Henry Lee was a preacher, Reverend Henry Lee Gilbert. The reason we're stopping here is not because they were important, but this is River 1 and River 2. These are the first two plots that were laid out. They weren't purchased until later. But just out of curiosity, I looked it up. Joseph was a first sergeant with the 91st Pennsylvania Infantry Company C, promoted to captain, got a field promotion in February of 1865. He was wounded at Petersburg. And his son, Reverend Henry Lee Gilbert, was a language teacher at Episcopal Academy. Okay, move up to that big block in front of you. It's a brown block. John Lawrence LeConte, M.D., 1825, 1883. This is River 5. He was a son of a naturalist. He was raised by his father. Went to medical school in 1846. And in 1850, on a trip to California, he gathered 10,000 beetles, and he sent them back to the Academy of Natural Sciences. And in 1852, he was made a member of the Academy and continued his beetle collection. 20,000 beetles destroyed by fire. From 1878 until his death, he served as assistant director of the U.S. Mint. But what he's remembered for is John LeConte named half of the insect taxa in the United States. He's the father of American beetle study. He has 4 genera named for him: Lecontella, Lecontellus, Lecontia, and Contia, and even a new mineral that was derived from bat guano is called lecontite. It's a sodium ammonium sulfite dihydrite. I talked about John LeConte in All Bones Considered number 22, The Birds and the Bees. Next to him is our first celebrity corpse. This is his brother-in-law, Robert Cooper Greer, 1794 to 1870, River 5. He was born in Cumberland County. He's a Presbyterian, admitted to the bar in 1817. He was a Jacksonian Democrat. He practiced law for about 15 years, and then he was a judge for 13 years. In the middle of the 19th century, there was a lot of controversy about appointing Supreme Court justices. He was the 5th choice for a Supreme Court seat which had sat vacant for 841 days, the longest vacation of a seat on the Supreme Court in history was filled by this guy after 4 other people were turned down. They were rejected. He was a dough-faced Northern Democrat. He was a pro-slavery Northerner, although he was anti-secession. In fact, he actually used to give speeches saying that all good Christians must reject abolitionism. Really like to hear the the thought that went behind that. He ruled that captive Confederate soldiers were traitors, not prisoners of war. And what he is least fondly remembered for is he voted with Roger Taney on the Dred Scott decision. He was one of the people who decided that black people could not now or ever be true citizens of the United States. And unfortunately, he is buried right there at Laurel Hill West. This is another case of brothers-in-law being buried together, like Clarence Clark and Frederick Winslow Taylor. Those two at least had something in common. But here we've got a Supreme Court justice and a guy who collected beetles. And they're buried together. The next little plot over, it's Cummings. Edwin Clinton Cummings and Christabel Cummings. I was attracted to this because of the name Christabel, and I'm glad I stopped there. I mean, Edwin was okay, 1882 to 1974. He was a confectioner, Cummings Chocolate, but he was in competition with guys like Wilbur and Hershey and Whitman. In the 1917 monograph, The Candy-Making Industry in Philadelphia, he's not even mentioned. Christabel was 9 years his senior. She studied at PAFA, and she studied in Europe. She lived in Washington, D.C., and she did artwork for the Capitol building, portraits, sculptures, retouching. She did reproductions and medals. She did a medal for Admiral Byrd in 1948. There's a bronze bust of Röntgen at the National Museum of Health and Medicine that she did in 1940. Still stuck on the 19th century. She has other works at the Smithsonian, yet this Philadelphia woman who's buried in Bala has nothing at PMA or PAFA. So you have to go to Washington to see her work. I'm going to have to include her. I'm going to have to put together a virtual tour of artists at Laurel Hill West so I can show some of their artwork. Believe me, we got enough of them. Wow. A lot of people made their livings doing artwork back then. A couple of plots down. It's a flat stone. It's just, you go past a sidewalk and there are 2 flat stones. This is River 15. You're looking at Abram Weingartner Harris, Ph.D. He went to Friends Central, and then he went to Wesleyan in Munich, Germany. And after a distinguished academic career in 1893, he was appointed president of Maine State College. This is a few years after the Land Grant Act, but he's the one who shepherded Maine State to becoming the University of Maine in 1897. From 1906 to 1916, he served as president of Northwestern University. He established the School of Commerce. He had the gymnasium built. He just increased everything there. He's the guy who started this tradition that I love so much, the purple candle tradition, the candle lighting ceremony. While he was at Northwestern, he established a tradition that a purple candle would be lit on a specific day every year around the world by alumni of Northwestern. And he started with a candle that looked like it was about 3 feet around and about 4 feet high. And here, more than 100 years later, they are still doing this ceremony. Every year on a particular date, Northwestern alumni around the world light a purple candle, preferably with a stick from the branch of a tree that was on the Northwestern campus. That's a nice little habit. And let's see, what else did Abram Weingartner Harris, Ph.D., do? He was the founder and first president of Phi Kappa Phi. He was founder of Alpha Delta Tau. After retirement, he did independent research. His gravestone has a near-perfect description: scholar, teacher, leader, friend. If somebody puts that on your tombstone, you lived a good life. Next up, River 15, the Burnhams. George Burnham Jr., 1848, 1921. He was head of the finance department at Baldwin Locomotive, first president of the City Club. They had their clubhouse at 313 South Broad Street. So he was a typical 19th century Philadelphia capitalist. His younger sister, however, Mary Burnham, 1852, 1928, financed suffragist protesters around the country. She helped set up the Pennsylvania branch of the National Women's Party. She and several other upper-class matrons plastered pro-suffrage posters all over the city. They were arrested. They were part of a committee to raise money for Susan B. Anthony's statue. The good news is this woman born in 1852 lived long enough to vote. She didn't die until 1928. So that's good, because a lot of the suffragists did not live long enough to vote. Now, there is a stone that is about 6 feet tall. It says Edward Williams, 1824-1899. This is River 21. I thought, okay, let's see what I can find about this guy. Are you ready for this? He was born in Vermont. He wanted to be an engineer, but he developed asthma, and he went to medical school instead. Now, I'm going to skip an event here. I'm going to skip 1848 and go to 1850 when he had a coughing fit. And when he had a coughing fit, he brought up a burr of some kind, and his asthma went away. And he realized, well, I still want to be an engineer. So he actually left medicine and he became an engineer. And in 1859, he became superintendent of the Galena Railroad. He was a Knight of the Polar Star. A lot of philanthropy to the University of Pennsylvania, University of Vermont, others. Large collection of Asian art. All of that is very interesting. But in 1848, he was a country doctor in Vermont. This is the first physician to see Phineas Gage after the tamping bar incident. If you don't know about Phineas Gage and the tamping bar incident, look it up. I will only tell you that he was using what he thought was a non-ferrous tamping rod on some explosive powder, and it exploded, and it drove this bar through his head. I talked about this when I talked about the when I talked about the neurosurgeon who was still doing lobectomies. Explained about this early traumatic lobectomy. Anyway, this guy buried there right off the sidewalk at Laurel Hill East was the first doctor to see Phineas Gage. It took the company physician 48 hours to arrive. And of course, Phineas Gage survived. So whatever he did might have helped, or it might just have not caused any further harm. Next, Milne family plot, River 27 to 31. This is a big plot because there are a lot of Milnes. The patriarch is actually buried at Laurel Hill East. He's the one who started the textile mill. And now Caleb Jr., when he was 18, joined his father's business and eventually took over. You can assume he was wealthy when you find out that his neighbor on one side was the Wanamakers and on the other side was the Wideners. So yeah, he had money. In 1897, the Milne Building, Washington between 10th and 11th. And in 1902, the fourth floor of this building was rented to a group of cigar makers who hired young immigrant girls who had questionable grasp of English against the laws. And there were several hundred girls working this. A co-worker had some sort of an accident that caused him to let out a shriek, which put everybody on edge. The foreman thought he would calm everyone down by shouting, "There is no fire!" And the only word that some of the girls understood was fire. They panicked. Hundreds of girls raced for the stairs. 2 of them jumped from the windows and died. This is years before. You've heard of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. That was 1913? This is 1902. It took 20 minutes to untangle the pile of girls at the bottom of the stairway. 8 people were dead, ages 12 to 22. Most of these were immigrants. They were working illegally. They did not speak English. And when the investigators went in to check what happened, the building met every single existing fire code of the city. The doors opened outwards, the stairwells were wide, everything was exactly the way it was supposed to be. But when you're dealing with 400 panicked teenage girls, all of those rules go out the window, and 8 people died. You can read more, or you can hear more about that at All Bones Considered 45, stogies, coffin nails, and spittoons. Who else is there? Let's see, Caleb III, 1888 to 1961. He served in the Marines. He was a photographer for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Caleb IV is not buried here. He was the grandson of Junior. He was a struggling actor in New York City. And in 1935, there were headlines across the country. This young actor, the son of a scion of Philadelphia, was kidnapped and being held for ransom, which his grandfather refused to pay. A few days later, he was found alive in a ditch. He was partially bound and taped. The FBI was summoned, and they got involved, and guess what? It was all a hoax. He had self-kidnapped himself to get more publicity for his acting. He came perilously close to going to jail. J. Edgar Hoover was not amused by this. He tried to make up for it. He actually became a poet in addition to being a failed actor. And when the war started, when the Second World War started, he went to Africa as a volunteer ambulance driver. Killed in action. He is buried in Tunisia. But I want to remember him as somebody who kidnapped himself and really annoyed J. Edgar Hoover. And then finally at the left side, there is a stone for Warren Milne. He married an actress named Virginia Hoodless, and there was a messy divorce that was all over the newspapers. He ended up being married 3 times. I find it intriguing that not one of the wives is buried with him. The woman who's buried there is obviously not his wife. She wasn't born until after he died. So I don't know the whole story there. There's probably a big one. Down the hill, we're not going to go there because it is a little bit treacherous, especially if the grass is a little bit wet. But the Head family chose their plot down there. There are a couple of brownstone table stones down there. It's an amazing plot. The father, the patriarch, was the dean of dentistry at Jefferson. But it's the kids I want to talk about. The daughter, Elizabeth Head Fetter, 1904 to 1973. She was an Agnes Irwin grad, and then she went to Vassar, and she wanted to be a doctor, just like her father and her brothers and various other people. She couldn't get through chemistry. So in 1927, she went to University of Colorado and became a writer. She started by writing ad copy and then short pieces under the pen name Hannah Lees, L-E-E-S. In 1930, she did the next best thing to becoming a doctor. She married one, Ferdinand Fetter. And now she became Elizabeth Head Fetter. From 1933 to 1935, Hannah Lees had 10 articles in the New Yorker. This is the peak New Yorker, 1933 to 35. She's sharing pages with Alexander Woollcott and Dorothy Parker. Then she started to write medical articles for Collier's, Block That Blood Clot, all about cancer, and Saturday Evening Post, commentary for various liberal magazines. Big magazine article was 1944. It was a popular medical magazine, or a medical magazine for non-medical people. Let's put it that way. It was called Hygeia. She wrote an article called The Word You Can't Say. 5 pages on masturbation, 3 years before the Kinsey Report came out. 5 pages on what's the big deal, everybody does it. It caused a little bit of a controversy. The same year, she threw some more oil on the fire and released a book called Till the Boys Come Home. This is about a wife who seeks sexual gratification while her husband is away overseas. And the problem that some critics had with this is she was not punished at the end. She, quote-unquote, got away with it. You should read the reviews on this book. It's called Till the Boys Come Home. Reviews by women reviewers have a totally different feel and a totally different sound than the reviews from the male reviewers. 1951, she directed the phone campaign for the Clark-Dilworth campaign. Remember Clarence Clark? His son ran for mayor and won. And her husband outlived her by 18 years. I talked about Elizabeth Head Fetter in All Bones Considered 48, shattering some glass ceilings. And then her kid brother Howard. He was born in 1914. He lived until 1991. Howard wanted to be like his sister. He wanted to be a writer, but he was no good. So he took aptitude tests that showed he had special talents in 3D spatialization. So he graduated from Harvard in 1936 as an engineer. In 1939, he was riveter at an aircraft plant, but he worked his way up to a designer for a plane called the D-26 Marauder. It was also known as the Horror from Baltimore. She was called that because she had no apparent visible support. He was a good poker player. He developed a nice cash, a nest egg of about $6,000. He learned pretty much everything there was to know about alloys and plastics while he was working in the aeronautics industry. And in 1947, he decided to take up a new hobby. Let's see, he was 33 years old. Skiing. He was lousy. He was absolutely lousy at skiing. So like any good engineer, he blamed the equipment. He used his knowledge and skills and he started to build skis. The first 39 pairs broke. The 40th pair, he was about out of money. He was about out of patience. He was about to go back into engineering. The fourth set of skis worked perfectly. So he incorporated head skis. Started by selling them out of the trunk of his car, started to make a profit. By 1964, when Billy Kidd silvered in the slalom using head skis, the sales took off. And in 1971, he got out too early. He sold head skis for $16 million. He retired. He took up tennis. He was lousy at it. Seriously. The coach said, if you practice hitting balls, you might get 5 to 10% better. So he bought this machine to fling balls, and it sucked. It really did. He fixed it. He took it back to the company. He said, I fixed your machine. It works the way it's supposed to now. By the way, what do you do here? So this is a company called Prince. He bought 25% of Prince. Even after getting a machine that served him balls, he was still no good. So he started to use his aerodynamic 3D spatialization gift to think about where's the sweet spot on a racket? Where do I have to hit? Because the problem he had, even though he was a big guy, he was well over 6 feet tall, the racket kept twisting in his hands. He said, the racket's just not good. So he did the physics on it, and lo and behold, there was no sweet spot on the wooden rackets. He took an aluminum alloy and made oversized banjo head rackets. There's no rules in tennis that tells you what you're supposed to hit the ball with, believe it or not. If you want to hit the ball with a tablespoon or a cricket bat, you can do that. But the better thing to hit it with is something that has a big head on it. So he developed this new oversized banjo head racket. 1978, Pam Shriver reached the U.S. Open Finals at 18 years old using a Prince racket. This time he did better. When he sold Prince out in 1982, he got $62 million. He did great things with his money. If you've been to Vail, Colorado, there's the Head Sports Medical Center. That is him. His third wife, I'm not going to go through the marriages. You can listen to the podcast. But his third wife was the widow of the guy who invented cop radar. But she and he were both very good skiers, and they met in Vail, Colorado, and they set up that medical center in Vail. And then in 1991, the year that he died, Baltimore dedicated the Head Theater. That's their black box theater in Baltimore. So Howard Head was a really cool guy. I talked about him at length in All Bones Considered 34, Tennis Anyone. Flatstone, Cramp, Charles Henry. Well, if you're Philadelphian, you know what Cramp did, right? 1828 to 1913, he was the son of William. The shipbuilders, with three brothers, it was William Cramp and Sons. Charles was one of the sons. They built the USS Indiana, the USS Massachusetts, closed in 1927 but reopened in 1940 to build cruisers and submarines in anticipation of World War II. I don't have the monument in front of me, so I can't tell you the name of it. I think it's Smith. There's an obelisk. It's a gray obelisk, but there are 4 or 5 stones in front of it. The one on the far right is the one we're interested in here. This is River 43. It's right next to Cramp. George Herzog. He was born in Bavaria. He supervised the decoration of the palaces of Ludwig I, especially the ceiling and the wall, and he was a graduate of the Royal Academy of Arts. Came to the United States in 1870s. Herzog and Kaiser, interior designers. They were the interior designers of choice for the Gilded Age millionaires. He decorated Elkins, Fittlers, Widener's. He decorated the Academy of Music. At City Hall, he decorated the Supreme Court and the mayor's office. I'm going to go to the mayor's reception room this Monday. I'll explain that at the end of this. He did the Masonic Temple, the Egyptian, Ionic, and Norman rooms of the Masonic Temple. There's been at least one PhD thesis on this guy's work. He is a very important artist in his class of interior designers. I'm recording this on May 14th. On Monday, May 18th, I have been invited to a reception at City Hall because of one of my podcasts. In the mayor's reception office, we're going to be looking at previously unseen photographs, close-ups of all of the statues on City Hall. These photos were made in the 1880s, before the statues were placed on the building. They're going to be part of an exhibit that's opening at the archives for the archives on, on Spring Garden. The archives building is interesting. It used to be something to do with maternity clothing, and there are 9 blocks protruding from the front wall of the archives building. Each of them is a little bit bigger, like you're watching a pregnancy in progress. It's a very strange place. Strange looking thing. But the people in the archives at City Hall had heard about the podcast I did about statues around City Hall and the podcast I did about the Calders. They invited me to this reception. So I graciously accepted. I have to be in town on Monday anyway. I'm giving a talk that night at my American Legion on Memorial Hall, the Meade statue, and Smith Memorial Arch. You can see that on YouTube, though, because I've already got it posted on YouTube. Moving on from George Herzog, there is a little stone that says Guillaume Claimer. I stopped because I don't see the word Guillaume that much, the name that Guillaume that much. I was curious. He was 1875 to 1963. This is River 45. His will stated that his 4 elderly saddle horses should be euthanized humanely within 2 months of his death, because he feared that they would not be cared for, and it was better to put them to death than to let them be mistreated. His wife went to Orphans Court and had this overturned, and she was able to place the horses in the hands of a trusted trainer. I can't tell you another thing about Guillaume Claimer, but that story just deserved to be mentioned. Next, believe it or not, this is the one mausoleum. We got 270 mausoleums all over the property. This is the only one on this tour. This is William Brewster Wood in 1851-1905. This is River 45. He was the grandson of Allen Wood of Iron and Steel, the Wood, Iron and Steel out in Conshohocken. This is the guy that owned Woodmont, the William Lightfoot Price Mansion, which later went to Father Divine. There's a whole story behind that. I don't think I've done a podcast about that, because the Father Divine story is fascinating, even though he's not buried at Laurel. This might be my connection. I can stretch it pretty thin to make a good podcast, I'll tell you. Anyway, William Wood went to Saunders Military Academy, and he did a trip around the world. He worked the mill for 8 years, spent most of his life just doing whatever he pleased. He was the first automobile to take a 3,000-mile tour across the United States. Next up, there's a nice little obelisk called Jagode, 1811, 1870. Couldn't find anything about it. He was a textile merchant. He was born in Prussia. And it's not that different from, well, the Folkerods in the next one, in River 58. John Sr., Central High graduate. He was a clerk at the Bank of the Republic, and he worked his way up to president of the Manayunk National Bank. Jenny was a feminist and a suffragist. She spent 45 years on board of the Roxborough Home for Women. She was their vice president for 25 years. She was on the women's committee of the Philadelphia Orchestra, so she worked closely with Frances Ann Wister. Remember the Acorn Club, the Art Alliance. She's got a list of clubs like the club men you used to see in the 1880s. You know, they belong to the Rabbit Club and the Punch Club and the Fish Club, all of these other clubs. This was Jenny, 60 years later, the same sort of thing. Next one, River 59, Horace Franklin Whitman. Grandfather Stephen French Whitman was the founder of Whitman Chocolates. And I talked about him in All Bones Considered, number 4, Holidays Among the Stones. Whitman started in 1854 as sugar plums. They introduced advertising in the 1860s. But Horace is the third generation. And even this late, he died in 1911, the Whitman sampler was not introduced until after his death. So that classic box of Whitman sampler that we associate with the Whitmans didn't come about while the Whitmans still ran the company. The Whitman Company, I always am fascinated by this little detail. The Whitman Company was the largest consumer of cellophane from France in the world until 1924, when DuPont started to make cellophane in the United States. Moving on, we got River 61, Schoen, Schoen, Charles, metal worker. He invented the Schoen steel wheel. You can look it up. You'd recognize it immediately. You know exactly what it is. And they converted to big guns during World War II. He died in 1917, but Schoen was still around, and they made big guns, artillery, for the Army. Not easily found. Between Schoen and Myers, about 20 paces downhill. And even then, you might not spot it. It's a plaque. It's maybe 1.5 feet wide, maybe a foot tall. It's not that big a plaque. This is John Ernst Worrell Keeley, 1829 to 1898. One of the biggest grifters who has ever hit Philadelphia. He was orphaned. He was raised by his grandparents. And here's where things went sour. See, he got into theater. He was a painter. He was a carpenter. He was a mechanic, which automatically made him into a carnival barker. And next, he became an inventor, the Keeley engine. The theory of the Keeley engine is that by vibrating a secret combination of air and water at a proper frequency, it liberates interatomic ether. He collected thousands of dollars from investors. He got backing from a wealthy widow, Clara Jessup Bloomfield Moore. Now, to keep up appearances, there were occasional explosions and fires at his lab. He would occasionally give a demonstration that appeared to work like he said it would, but he would not allow anyone to examine the equipment. At his death, the laboratory was found to be a warren, a rat's nest of pipes and tubes and counterweights, that he had created this illusion of perpetual motion. This guy still has believers in his theory. He was buried in an unmarked grave. This plaque that you see was bought by his admirers. His vibrating secret combination of air and water at proper frequencies and interatomic ether. These people still believe that we just haven't found the right combination yet to create the interatomic ether. But they were kind enough to give him a plaque so I can talk about him. Now, totally different shift of moods here, and you're not going to go to it. It's behind the Myers, but it is probably 200 feet downhill. You can see the back of the stone. It's the White stone, Roy Wilson White, 1872-1900. This is River 439. He was from Richmond, Indiana. and he went to Earlham College. He was hired by University of Penn Law and sent to Paris to learn French law. His specialty was going to be South American and French law. He never made it to South America, but he did make it to Paris. Saturday, May 19th, 1900. He was on campus teaching. He left about 10:30 to catch a train for Germantown. And about 11 o'clock, he was unconscious with a skull fracture, and his prize watch was missing. He died the next morning, never regained consciousness. There were two itinerant African Americans in the neighborhood who were immediately picked up and grilled until they confessed that they did it. And then a third black man tried to pawn the watch, so he was arrested also. The three were tried and convicted, and they were hanged. And when the first two were hanged, the first hanging went pretty well. The second one took 17 minutes for him to die, dangling there. Before the third man was hanged, he said the first two guys were innocent. They hadn't done anything. A horrid story. A horrid story. And this is just in 1900 I'm talking about. Also down the hill a little bit, not quite as far as Roy Wilson White, is William Wagner. Wagner grew up wanting to be a scientist. He worked for Stephen Girard, so he got rich. And in 1855, he opened the Wagner Free Institute of Science. He was a huge believer in free education. Wagner served as the first branch of the Free Library. And that included, that first branch of the Free Library included 18,000 from his own personal collection. The Wagner still gives lectures. In fact, when am I going to a Wagner lecture? Sometime in the next couple of weeks, I'm actually going to a lecture at the Wagner Institute. The lecture hall still has the glass slide projector, and it still has the racks under the seats where the gentleman can place his hat, or the lady. But the ladies usually didn't take their hats off inside. The gentleman did. And there's a rack under the seat where you can place your bowler. More about William Wagner, Biographical Bytes from Bala, number 25. River 69 is Robert Morton Yan. He had a cigar store at 15th and Chestnut. He was a member of the Union League. He was a Mason. Good, solid Philadelphia businessman. And he went on vacation. And on the morning of September 2nd, 1913, the Bar Harbor Express was carrying vacationers that were returning from New England resorts. It was stopped at a track signal near New Haven, Connecticut. Dense fog, limited visibility, and the White Mountain Express, traveling at 40 to 45 miles per hour, failed to stop, rammed the rear of the Bar Harbor Express, split two cars in half, overturned a third one, 21 people dead, including Mr. Yan. More than 50 people were injured. I probably have enough people killed in train crashes now to do a podcast about train crashes. This one I had never heard of. I mean, that's how common multi-casualty train crashes were back then. 21 dead, and it barely makes a blip on the map. Under the trees, in the shade of the trees, is Mayor Mackey. This is Harry Arista Mackey. 1869, 1938. This is River 71. Harry was from the Scranton area, but 1889 to 90, he was Lafayette, football and baseball. And then he went to Penn Law. 1891-93, he's captain of the football team at Penn. Admitted to the bar in 1894. He coached football, Pennsylvania Military Academy. That's now Widener University. In 1895, he coached the University of Virginia. He went 9-2. He was the third coach at the University of Virginia. But in Philadelphia, 1905, he was director of public health, and then he was director of public works. And by 1925, he had been elected city treasurer. 1926, he was campaign manager for Scott Vere for Senate. Tom Keels talked about the Veres in a prior podcast, and I forgot to put the number down for that. I apologize. But Vere was one of the three Vere brothers who ran South Philadelphia and totally screwed up the sesquicentennial. But Harry Mackey was elected mayor in 1927, and he was a wet in a dry times. From 1932 until 1937, the winner of the annual crosstown Phillies athletics game was awarded the Mackey Cup. And I would love to know where the Mackey Cup exists today. I'll bet you it's in the Drexel collection of Philadelphia history. I added the Strongs, River 73, just because I thought this was an interesting story. James Fry Strong and Olga Synoxon Strong. James was 1890-1978. Olga was 1889-1976. They got married on Tuesday, February 16th, 1926. So let's see, he would have been 36, she would have been about the same. He'd been ill with pneumonia for several days. The ceremony took place at bedside. They'd trimmed the guest list to about 30. I don't know if he got cold feet or what, but they stayed married for 50 years. He obviously survived the pneumonia. They stayed married for 50 years. This is the second guy I know about who was married while he was in bed. The other was William Clothier. He was in bed because he'd fractured his pelvis after an equestrian accident. But the difference there is William Clothier had hundreds of people coming to his wedding, and now it had to be at bedside. And this tour finished with, just a little bit off the path, Anna M. Jarvis, 1864-1948, River 499. She was born in West Virginia. She was the ninth of 11 children. She had 2 years of college, became a teacher, and she came to Philadelphia to live with her brother. In May 1905, her mother died. And Anna had such a relationship with her mother that she felt there should be an official day to honor mothers every year. So in 1908, a quote-unquote Mother's Day was officially declared, but not as a holiday. Anna traveled around the country, tried to make it a national holiday. May 9th, 1914. And remember, I gave you this tour on May 9th, 2026. That was the day that Woodrow Wilson declared Mother's Day to be a holiday. It was immediately commercialized, and Anna fought the commercialism. Several years later, she even tried to have the holiday canceled. She was arrested in 1925. She was trying to stop somebody from selling carnations. She went to Wanamaker's. Wanamaker was her old partner. John Wanamaker had helped her make this a holiday. And she went to his beautiful, what was that called? The Crystal Tea Room? I don't remember. I was never there. I was not a Philly guy. Unfortunately, I grew up in Chicago. We had our own thing there. But she went to this Mother's Day luncheon and was served a Mother's Day salad, which she promptly dumped on the floor and walked out of the restaurant. She had, to be generous, she had mental deterioration in old age. She actually was in an asylum. And her fees were paid by the floral and greeting card industry. I talked about her in All Bones Considered, Holiday Among the Stones. So that's who was on the tour. But let me tell you about some other people who are in, since we're here, I'll tell you about other people in the river section that you can seek out on your own if you want to. See, River 84, got Robert Burns Scott. Boy, that, tell me, self-evident. 1868 to 1945. Went to Philadelphia College of Pharmacy. Jeff Medford, 50 years. He started his own building and loan association. And then his son, George C. Scott. So we got Robert Burns Scott and George C. Scott. Okay. No, that's his brother. I apologize. That's his brother. George C. Scott was 1870 to 1932. He was a real estate assessor. John Rogers Scott, 1873, 1945. So they got three brothers buried together here. He was Central High, UPenn Law. From 1915 to 1919, he was our at-large delegate of the U.S. House of Representatives. And his son, Hardy Scott, was also a representative. Hardy Scott was married to horsewoman, are you ready for this? Elmira Rockefeller Jackson. That's Slab Jackson's widow. I talked about Slab Jackson as one of the first professional football players. Who else? Let's see, River 91, Henry Fry. That's right at the corner. Henry Fry is at the corner. He was a coffee importer, treasurer of the Philadelphia Board of Trade, twice president of the Grocers Exchange, longtime Union League member, Historical Society, typical 19th century clubman. Who else was in the river section you should know about? Oh, definitely Marie. Marie K. Formad, 1860-1944. Marie is in River 322. I talked about Marie at length in All Bones Considered 72 about women's medical school. And Marie is one of the women in the new play that, as I dictate this, is playing at People's Light and Theater, written by Sully Holman. Or Sully Holum, I'm sorry, Holum. Sully has been working on this for years, and I have a ticket to see it. I'm going to see it next Wednesday, so I may or may not report back. But Marie was born in Russia. She had a brother who was 14 years older than her, had come to the United States and become a pathologist. He invited Marie to come, so she did, and she went to women's medical. After it had stopped being female medical, and indeed was women's medical, she graduated in 1886. Her thesis was the first of its kind and is still quoted. Her thesis reported on the autopsies of 6 women who died after illegal abortions. She attended 3 of these autopsies herself because her brother was the pathologist for the city. This report is still cited in research because the causes of death were not what was on the death certificate, and all of them were related to illegal abortions. So the research was going on even back then. In 1888, she became a clinician in gynecology, and in 1903, the chief of GYN. She had served as pathologist at West Philadelphia Hospital for Women. In 1913, she was among the first group of women admitted to the American College of Surgeons. And in the Great War, this is a déjà vu of Maud Kelly. Maud Kelly is at Laurel Hill East, a woman surgeon who volunteered for the Army and who was rebuffed and joined the French. Marie Formad did exactly the same thing. She was rejected by the U.S. Army. She joined the French, and just like Maud Kelly, she was awarded the Croix de Guerre. At her 50th anniversary dinner at Bellevue Stratford in 1936, several hundred attendees, and one of them stood up and said she would rather operate than eat. Marie K. Formad, M.D., Russian-born and Philadelphia hero. Also in this section, Charles Benjamin Dudley, River 940, 1842 to 1909. He was born in New York City in 1871, got his B.A. from Yale. He was born in New York City, got his B.A. from Yale in 1871, Ph.D. in 74. And in 1875, he became a chemist for Pennsylvania Railroad. His first challenge was, why do the rails keep failing? They would get rails from steel companies, and the rails would fail. So in 1878, he developed rigorous standards for steel, lubricant, paint, etc. It initially upset steel magnets, but the failure rate plummeted. He had set the standards. From 1896 to 97, he was president of the American Chemical Society. 1898, he was co-founder of the American Society for Testing and Materials, the ASTM. We have 3 pioneers in standardizing stuff at Laurel Hill West. Because I already told you about Frederick Winslow Taylor, but we also have Phineas Olson. Phineas Olson is the guy who developed the Little Giant, the stress testing machine. Put these three together, Charles Benjamin Dudley, Frederick Winslow Taylor, and Phineas Olson, and you can pretty much write a history of manufacturing in the United States. It's pretty amazing. Oh, let's see. Who else did I look? I tried to find stuff on David Conover. He was a jeweler. He's in River 13. He had a huge funeral, but I couldn't find much about him. River 264, Samuel Kennard Hopkins, 1853 to 1928. Samuel was in the roof repair business. His 18-year-old son, Harry, 1884 to 1900, died after a fall while he was repairing a roof. He was able to temporarily hang onto a water spout, but that broke away from the building. And then the ambulance that was taking him to the hospital was in a crash. So, unfortunately, Harry died when he was 18. He's buried there. Let's see, who else did I look at? Percival Pop Howard Shertell, River 204. Famed 1890s Temple basketball and baseball coach. He became a trusted referee. Reminds me of Elwood Rutschman that I talked about in an earlier podcast. Remember, basketball is the only sport we know exactly when it started. The day that James Naismith nailed those rules to the door of the gym. Who else? Oh, there was a guy I wanted to find stuff on named Homer Wonders, but couldn't find anything. River 84, Jean Brownscott Darby, 1903-1990. She was a horse breeder and a competitor. She won English championship for hackney horses in 1924, 25, 26, American championships for hackney horses for 5 consecutive years, 23 to 27. Charles V. Dorworth is in River 548. He was a CHOP physician. He died in the 1918 flu epidemic. Clarissa F. Dye, 1832-1921. She's in River 574. Volunteer Civil War nurse, president of National Association of Army Nurses of the Civil War. She fought for pensions for nurses, which were finally awarded. River 784 is George Somerell Fraser, 1918-1945. He was in the Navy. He was killed in action. His ship was sunk February 15th, 1945. Another woman suffrage leader was Ladson Hall. Ladson Hall, 1870-1945. She was in 876. She traveled and spoke by automobile throughout Pennsylvania while she was advocating for the right to vote. Another train wreck victim, River Terrace 5. Terrace is down low. That's where the mausoleum is. I mentioned that brownstone mausoleum that's in the River Terrace section. Alva Hutters, 1862-1906. Another train crash. This is the Atlantic City train wreck. 53 people died when the train fell off a drawbridge. River 187, we have Edward G. Kettle, 1865-1915. He was fishing in rough seas off the Jersey shore when his boat capsized, and he drowned. Stuart D. Ludlam is in River 71. He was an advertising exec for Disney. And he did a lot of the advertising for the opening of Disneyland back in the 1950s. Frederick Spiel, S-P-E-E-L, is in River 486. He lived from 1829 to 1897. He manufactured fishing tackle. He was born in Germany. He is a Civil War veteran. One of our older residents, Charles Nicholas Buck, 1775 to 1851, so obviously his body was moved here. He's in River 985. He was Consul General of the Free City of Hamburg, Germany, and a merchant. And I will finish with Clara Grissom Smith, 1861-1904. Clara Smith was the name of my maternal grandmother. This Clara Smith is buried in River 660. She was a teacher. Teachers had to be single. Clara had married 10 years before she died, in secret, with a boarder in the same boarding house. But she didn't want to lose her job. She wanted that independence of being able to teach. Clara Smith was buried in her wedding gown. As far as we know, that is the first time that she wore the dress. So I'm going to stop the river section tour there. That it was a bit of a challenge, but it was fun. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I do. You can use this as a quasi-guide to go out and find these things on your own. But if all you do is listen to this, I think it's entertaining the way it is. It's different from what I usually do. I know that. I go through 7-year cycles with things, and we're in the 7th year of me doing this podcast, which automatically happens. Until I was in my 50s, I never held a job longer than 5 years. The fact that I've been with the same woman for 54 years is nearly a miracle, to be honest with you. But I'm looking for ways to reinvigorate the way I do the podcast. I've got so many more people I want to tell you about. I literally have. I'm looking in front of me right now at a series of about 24 notebooks, each of which has information about people buried at the cemeteries. And I got to transmit that information somehow, because otherwise nobody's going to have it available to them. So That's why I did this. You may hear more things like this. I'm going to try to get back on track. I mean, don't hold me to this. But next month, June 1st, I hope to do Celebrity Corpses. Thomas Godfrey, Hugh Mercer, Hilary Baker, Commodore Alexander Murray, and Reverend William Smith. And at West, I've got a few musicians: Jeff Johnson, Rudolph Hennig, Winston Samuel, Ska Man. He was with Desmond Decker in the Aces. July, I am taking a break because military historian Russ Dodge has agreed to do a podcast on George Gordon Meade and John C. Pemberton. I can't wait. I'm doing Philip Jai-san and the founding of modern Korea. For July, our 250th birthday, I figured it would be appropriate to celebrate a country that based its independence on the United States, and for about 40 years, the guy who led that movement was interred or inurned at Laurel Hill West, Philip Jai-san. So I will tell that story. August, we get touchy. It's going to be slavery in Laurel Hill, people who owned other people: John Bolin, Stephen Duncan, Robert Ralston Stewart. And I think one of my historians is going to do one on the Christiana riots. Now, Biographical Bytes from Bala. I hope I have it well enough together because I want to do, in August, Saving Music from the Nazis. Wilhelm von Wymetal, Yanni Zanto, Max Strassenberger, Oscar Schwarr, and that's where I might get Gerbner in. I don't know. So anyway, that's what's coming up in the next few months. I started this today at, about 2 hours ago. It's still early. There's still nobody else in this building where I have an office. But this was a learning experience for me. I hope it's a learning experience for you. Again, jrlexjr1947 at gmail.com. And be happy to answer any of your queries. I have no bibliography to give you because all of this stuff is from my own notes that I made along the way. And maybe I'll see you on a tour. Stay safe, stay well, stay above ground.